Good Vach, Shavua Tov, welcome. Thank you so much for coming, for being here. And a special thank you to my sister for coming all the way from America. So,
that's all she gets for the fact that she came all the way from America.
It's been really, really nice having you here and spending time with you. She's been really nice. She's been like staggering the tours with staying here so that we could spend time together. So it's really, really special. Yeah. And it was just my mother's first yortzeit a few weeks ago. And we had a Malava Malka commemorating her first yortzeit. And Heather wasn't able to be here, so I wanted her to be able to have the schus of being here now. And it's actually in between our mother and our father. So this year, given by Rabanit, is going to start in a few minutes, but it's Lilui Nishmas Rachel Gittel Bas Moshe and Yecheskel Ben Avram Moshe. Okay? And I just want to personally thank Rabanit for being here. She's really helped in so many ways with so many different things in so many different areas, and I just feel grateful and blessed to have you in my life and that you're my spiritual guide, my friend, and just a part of my life and my family. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Hashem.
שבוע טוב ומבורך, ברוכות הבאות, ברוכות הנמצאות. Thank you so much for coming out on this Motzei Shabbat. I know that when Shabbatot end early, everyone wants to take the opportunity to do fun things. And yet, you guys are coming here to do this fun thing, which is the learning of Torah, which is probably more important than anything else you would have done, chutz from spending time with your family. So, first of all, I want to thank Malka, our gracious host, who's always ready and willing to elevate herself spiritually, to do whatever she can, not only for her own neshama, but for the souls of her family and you women. So whenever I tell her, Malka, you should really do something, even though you kind of say, how am I going to do this? Baruch Hashem, you did it. Hashem should continue to bless you and give you tremendous koach, tremendous strength, fortification and security. You should see nachat ruach from your children. You should have shlom bait. And your adjustment here in Eretz Yisrael should go smoothly. And we should see you here for many years to come, together with Mashiach. You should greet him here in Eretz HaKodesh. And we welcome your sister all the way from America, but where specifically? Maryland. Oh, okay, you guys were neighbors. Okay, all the way from Maryland, Heather, right? I'm so happy that you were able to make it here tonight. As I said, when I met you, I heard so many wonderful things about you. And it's just an honor for me to finally have met you. Of course, we know this shiur is Leilui Nishmat Malka's parents, Rachel Gittel Bat Moshe, Aleh Shalom, and Yecheskel Ben Avraham Moshe Alav Shalom. So, we are beginning a new Sefer this coming week, Sefer Shemot, that's Exodus. And one of the many lessons we learn is about being an innovator. An innovator is somebody who does something today that has a rippling effect on tomorrow. It's somebody who has the ability to look ahead, someone with incredible foresight. Our Avot HaKadoshim, our forefathers, were innovators. They were trailblazers. Everything they did was for the sake of Am Yisrael, with the future of the Jewish people in mind. Every calculation they made, any step they took in life was with a deep understanding of how it's going to affect and set up the future of Am Yisrael, of the nation of Israel. Now we have three avot, three forefathers. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov Avinu, Alem Shalom. But Chachamim tell us that if there was a possibility of a fourth Av, Hashem would have chosen, who do you think?
David.
Who? David HaMelech. That's a good choice. What do you say?
Yosef.
Yosef HaTzadik is even a better choice, and it's the right choice. And it's the one that Chachamim say. Yosef HaTzadik. In these last four parshiot, we see how Yosef HaTzadik was indeed an incredible trailblazer like the Avot. Now, before we even continue, warning, I'm giving you a warning. You are about to get the largest, biggest, longest introduction of any shiur you will ever hear, just to be able to hear the point of the entire shiur for the last 5 minutes. This is the first time this ever happened to me. Usually, I give you everything all at once. Today, I'm giving you one long intro just to get to the main event. The Targum Onkelos, alav Shalom, writes that Yosef Bar Hakim, he was a brilliant person whose brilliance was demonstrated through his extraordinary foresight. For example, in last week's Parshat Vayigash, Yosef finally revealed himself to his brothers, and after their initial shock, he tells them, go back to Abba, go back to my father Yaakov, and take these agalot with you. Take these wagons back to Eretz Canaan, to the Holy Land. Go up to the Holy Land and come back to Egypt with my father and your families, including your flocks and your herds, and settle here in Goshen. Interestingly, Paro also extends an invitation to Yaakov and the entire family to settle in Mitzrayim, but he does it in a very strategic way. In his invitation, he leaves the flocks, the animals, the herds out of the picture. He tells the Shvatim, bring your father, bring your children, bring all your family members. V'zeu. That's the extent of his invitation. Yosef is beaming with joy. Bring my father, bring your families, bring everybody, bring your animals, bring the whole flock. Paro says, bring everybody. Leave the animals at home. Why? Why was it that Paro didn't want them to bring their flocks and herds down to Egypt? And why was Yosef stressing the fact that the animals must come down with them? Heather, I'm going to ask you a question. If you're a lawyer by trade, and somebody asks you what you do for a living, what would you answer? I ask you, oh Heather, what do you do for a living? What'd you say?
I'm a lawyer.
I'm a lawyer. Very good. You'd say, I'm a lawyer. If you're a doctor, what would you say? I'm a doctor. You'd state the line of work that you're in. But if your answer would be, I'm a doctor, my father was a doctor, my grandfather was a doctor, my uncle's a doctor, my cousin is also a doctor, and you went down the list, that would be a peculiar response. True? I asked you what you do for a living. I didn't ask for your family tree. Yet Yosef is very clear. He tells his brothers, Paro is going to ask you what you do for a living. Tell him that you are ro'eh tzon, that you're shepherds. And tell him that your father was a ro'eh tzon, and that his father was a ro'et tzon, and your great-great-father was also a shepherd? Tell him that you come from a line of shepherds. What was the purpose of that? Did Paro require the details of what the entire family occupied themselves with? Obviously something here is going on. It's here, Heather, that we see Yosef's brilliance, his amazing foresight, and his ability to be the trailblazer for future generations. You see, Yosef understood Paro's scheme. He knew that Paro regarded him as a genius and a brilliant mastermind. And when Paro found out that there was another 11 brothers who were like Yosef, when he found out that there's an entire family of geniuses, he immediately devised a plot to bring them all down to Egypt. He thought to himself, I have a problem here, because these are all Ivrim, the Hebrews. So how am I going to get them to assimilate with us? I have to assimilate them into the Egyptian culture, into the society of Egypt, because with these geniuses in our midst, these holy people in our midst, our economy will continue to thrive and will become the #1 superpower in the world. Because if Yosef, all by himself, single-handedly accomplished what he did here in Egypt, could you imagine what 11 Yosefs could do? So Yosef knew how Paro thought, and he saw what's coming. Through Ruach HaKodesh, through divine inspiration, he realized that God had sent him down to Egypt ahead of everybody else in his family in order to prepare the way for the future galut, for the impending exile of his entire family, and also for the future redemption. Yosef understood what his mission was and the incredible responsibility that went along with it. He knew that he needed to plant seeds into the soil right now, today, in the present, so that there would be an Am Yisrael that could blossom and survive the galut tomorrow, in the future. So he was going to sow spiritual influences in Egypt so that Am Yisrael could eventually leave Egypt as a pure nation. How did he accomplish this task? In a brilliant way. He tells his brothers, remind me what your name is? Lonnie. What's your Hebrew name? Ilana. Listen what he tells his brothers. He says, you must bring all the behemoth, all the animals, all the flocks you possess. And you should express to whomever you meet here that you're shepherds. Listen to his wording. Ve'amartem. Tell everybody, Anshei mikneh hayu avadecha mine'orenu ve'ad ata. We've been owners of livestock from our youth until now. Gam anachnu. Not only are we shepherds, gam avotenu, but our forefathers as well. Yosef tells them, tell the Egyptians that your father, your grandfather, and your great-grandfather, they were shepherds. And he says to them, do you know why it's important for you to inform them of these very important facts? Listen to the wording. Ki to'avat Mitzrayim kol ro'et tzon. Because all shepherds are abhorrent in the eyes of the Egyptians. The avodah zarah, Ilana, of the Egyptians was the sheep. They worshipped sheep. That was their god. And because of that, anybody in the shepherding business was considered an abomination in their eyes. It's like if you would go today to India, and chas v'chalila v'shalom, I don't even know if I should say chas v'chalila v'shalom, you would kill a cow. Their deity is the cow. So the Egyptians thought how could you slaughter the sheep, hit him with your shepherding staff? You know, sometimes you have to hit the sheep to get them going. When we view the sheep as our hierarchy, as our God. So because of their idol worshipping views, Paro stressed to the Shvatim, listen, we want you to come down and settle in Egypt. We want the entire family of Yosef. We want the great and holy Yaakov here with us. But don't bring your animals. Don't bring your flocks of sheep, because if you're shepherds, you have no place here in Egypt. Ilana, that's precisely what Yosef wanted. Ilana, who do you think the brothers listened to? To Paro or to Yosef? Very good. Obviously they adhere to the instructions of Yosef. And when Yosef came down, when they all came down to Egypt, together with Yaakov Avinu, they brought all their sheep and all their cattle. When Paro saw a family of shepherds, when he saw the multitude of sheep and cattle in his country, he screamed, "Get these Jews out of here! Take these people and put them in Goshen out of my sight." That's exactly what Yosef was hoping to accomplish. Now you tell me, Alana, what do you think he accomplished? What was this all about?
No, it's divination.
What's your name? What's your name?
דבורה.
דבורה, מה קורה כאן? מה קורה כאן?
שלא יהיה...
Oh, very good, very good. רגע, מצוין. Excellent. אבל שימי לב. Ever take a look at a map of ancient Egypt during the times, biblical time? If you take a look at the topography, the layout of Egypt, you'll notice that Goshen is not anywhere close to the center of Egypt. It's, as a matter of fact, it's at the exit. It's at the doorway of Egypt. Goshen is on the outskirts of Mitzrayim. וזה בדיוק, that's exactly מה שיוסף רצה. That's exactly what he wanted. He brilliantly masterminded the situation in order to create the first isolated Jewish machaneh. The first Jewish community in a foreign country filled with goyim that were idol worshippers. Yosef wanted Bnei Israel to have a place of their own, where they'd be able to dwell together and maintain their values, beliefs, and ideals without chas v'shalom assimilating into the Egyptian population. He wanted to prevent the problem of integration that Paro was so keen on achieving. And because of this, Yosef wanted Bnei Israel to be in their own city. So Goshen was the first Jewish community in a foreign land of Goyim, in a situation where the beginning of the Galut was ensuing. Yosef wanted to see to it that Am Yisrael remains intact, staying in their Dalet Amot. For him, ensured the purity of the nation as they go through this Egyptian exile. And I have something I want to share with you that just popped into my mind. Neshama, a few weeks ago we celebrated Hanukkah. Your mother told me, I called her up one night, I actually texted her one night, asking her if she wants to join our kumsitz. And she told me that you guys are playing dreidel. Were you there that night when they were playing dreidel? Ever notice the dreidel? The one in America says on it, Rashet Tevot, Nun, Gimel, Hey, and then Shin. Nes Gadol Haya Sham. There was a great miracle that happened there, meaning here in Israel. The The dreidel in Israel is Nes Gadol Haya Po. Neshama, did you ever notice that Nes Gadol Haya Sham, if you kind of scramble the letters, it's actually a city
Goshen is.
in Mitzrayim
That's what Nani said.
called Goshna. That's Gimel Shin Nun Hey. Goshna is actually used twice in the Parshiot. Twice. It's referred to as Goshen, but it's also referred to as Goshna, meaning that city. Gimel Shin Nun Hey. Those are the letters of a dreidel. Now I have a question for you. What in heaven's name are the letters of the city in Mitzrayim doing on a dreidel that we play on Hanukkah? What do you think the connection is based on what I said right now?
That's the whole point. We're in Galus.
Galut, and what happened there during the time of the Maccabim? What happened to Klal Yisrael, to 95% of the nation? They assimilated. The Nes Gadol Haya Sham was the fact that we somehow found our way back. We found our way back. That's a nes. It's a miracle. And I find it very striking that throughout the generations, there are connections between galuyot, exiles, and redemptions. But that was Yosef's brilliance, and that's what he tells his brothers. He says, I got a plan. You got to tell Paro that you're shepherds, that your fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers were shepherds, and you have to do this because Ba'avur teshvu be'eretz Goshen. This way it's going to guarantee that you're going to dwell in the city of Goshen, separated from the Egyptians, because To'avat Mitzrayim kol ro'etzon, because the Egyptians abhor anyone whose occupation is a shepherd. That was Yosef's first plan. There was something else Yosef did to ensure that Am Yisrael, who were coming down to the Galut, would be able to remain pure and unassimilated. What did he do? After the Egyptians ran out of money to buy food during the 7-year famine, they approached Yosef. He's the overseer. And they say, look, we have nothing left. We have no money to give you to purchase any food. We need to eat. So he says, it's not a problem. It's not an issue. Do you have any collateral? Do you have any merchandise that you want to sell as payment for the food? And they say, well, we've got real estate properties. We have land. We have homes that we could sell. And Yosef says, wonderful. I'll purchase your properties and your real estate as payment for all the food you can eat for years to come. The Egyptians agreed. They shake hands with Yosef. And Yosef bought practically all of the real estate of the entire country of Egypt. Yosef was the biggest real estate holding company in Egypt. He essentially owned the majority of the country. Remind me what your name is?
Eli.
Eli, as in?
As in Elishama.
Elishama. Why did he do this?
He was foreseeing.
Oh, very good. But what was he foreseeing? Tell me if some of us here can identify with what I'm about to tell you. Chachamim tell us that immediately after he bought everybody's properties, anyone who sold their home, they had to move, obviously. Those who lived in the north of Egypt, the Midrash says, moved to the south. Those who were in the west were moving to the east. He moved everybody around so that they no longer live where they used to live. They were forced to go to the other side of the country and find themselves new homes to live in. Why did Yosef do this? Yosef knew that when his family comes down to Egypt, like all new immigrants that settle in a new country, like the Olim, they may develop what's called a hargasha nechutit. That's a certain type of inferiority complex where they'll feel different than the citizens of the land. And automatically they're going to want to try to fit in. Does that sound familiar? But now, because they're going to feel like strangers in a new land, they might begin to overcompensate. That happens a lot. Many times, people who move to a new country will build bigger houses than the citizens of that country. They want to feel good with themselves. They might start to drive cars that are much more luxurious than the cars being driven by the people in that country. Why? Because they're trying to demonstrate that they're just like the citizens of that land. They want to feel a sense of belonging. They want to fit in. And because of that, there's a tremendous peer pressure and a social pressure. And as new immigrants, they might feel a need to overcompensate. They also tend to assimilate with the people of that country in order to appear as though they're like everybody else. It's happened throughout the Galuyot. Spain, Portugal, Germany. Yosef knew that this was going to be a huge problem. So what did he do after he bought everybody's land and homes? He asked everybody in the country to move from one side of the land to the other. And he did this so everybody should feel like newbies, like immigrants. And because of that, everybody was on equal footing. Nobody felt this urge or pressure to have to overcompensate or prove themselves to anybody because they were all in the same boat. That too was a method used to prevent assimilation. He realized that when a person doesn't feel like he fits in, he wants to be like everybody else. And therefore, there's a problem that he might not remain true to who he is, to his values, and to his ideals. But when a person doesn't feel the need to fit in because he's now like everybody else, we're all immigrants now, he does remain true to himself with his values and ideals in place. He doesn't feel a need to compete with others to be better or to change his entire being just to be able to fit in. And finally, there was one more wise forethought of trailblazing that Yosef instituted. He enacted a law that the taxes that the clergy in Egypt across the board, whether they're Jewish clergy or secular, they are paid to the government. They should stop paying those taxes. Today we call this parsonage. Yosef was the first to introduce the concept of parsonage. That means there's like churches, synagogues, yeshivas. They don't pay taxes to the government because they're exempt from taxes. He was the first one to remove the taxes that the clergy in Egypt, that the Rabbanim and the Lomdei Torah were paying. Anybody here can tell me why he did this? What's the point of that?
Levian. That Levian would have to.
Nevi'im?
Levi.
That was a consequence, but that's a good one. Say that again.
That Shevet Levi would have to be slaves.
Shevet Levi would not have to be slave. I like that one because he knew that. What did Shevet Levi do? What was their functionality? Learning Torah. Because he knew that without Torah there's no Am Yisrael. How would he ensure that the learning of a Torah continues in Egypt the next 210 years in a very difficult slavery, in a very dark galut? How is Torah going to be maintained and endured in the Egyptian exile? Yosef planted the seeds today during his time so that when the galut manifests tomorrow, meaning in the future, the Torah HaKadoshah will not be affected. How did he accomplish this? By saying to it that anyone who's in the line of spiritual service would not have to pay taxes to the Egyptian government. When he did that, it enabled, what's your name?
Geula.
Geulah, I like your name. It enabled the tribe of Levi, very good, ding, 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 the spiritual leaders of the Jewish people to continue to learn Torah without a financial burden throughout the entire Egyptian exile. Now, in this coming week's Parshat Shemot, we're given a glimpse as to how the slavery Bechlal began. You know how it all started? Through Sarei Misim, through IRS agents, tax collectors. It began with the burden of taxes. But those who were exempt from paying taxes, like Shevet Levi, were also exempt, Geulah, spot on, they were also exempt from slavery. The reason why the rest of the Jews became slaves was because they didn't have the money to cover the exorbitant taxes they needed to pay. So they had to pay off their debt by working for Paro, and eventually that work turned into forced labor. But Shevet Levi managed to continue to learn Torah throughout the entire Galut, so that the Torah would not just survive, but thrive. Because Am Yisrael's survival depends on the Torah HaKdosha. And those who maintained the Torah, who were Shevet Levi, they inspired the masses and they offered inspiration throughout the darkness of this terrible, terrible exile. But without Torah, where would Am Yisrael have drawn strength from? So Yosef thought, I got to do something right now, today, to be able to secure tomorrow, to safeguard the future continuity of Torah and Am Yisrael. The only way Bnei Yisrael will survive the Galut and be redeemed is through the preservation of Torah. So here too, we see Yosef's trailblazing ideas, and that he planted seeds today so that tomorrow, years later, in the future, Am Yisrael will have a chance of leaving the Galut with the Torah intact and without assimilation. That was the brilliance behind the agalot, the wagons that Yosef sent to his father Yaakov. Watch this. The Pasuk tells us that before Yaakov saw the wagons, he hesitated. He wasn't ready to go down to Egypt. But then the Torah says the following. Listen to these words. וידברו אליו את כל דברי יוסף אשר דיבר עליהם. The brothers told Yaakov all of Yosef's words that he said to them. וירא את העגלות אשר שלח יוסף לשאת אותו. And Yaakov sees the wagons that Yosef sent to carry him. ותחי רוח יעקב אביהם. The spirit of their father Yaakov was revived. Somehow when Yaakov saw these wagons, it encouraged him. He drew inspiration from these agalot, from these wagons, and that's what gave him the push to go down to Egypt despite the initial hesitation. What's your name?
Carla?
Karna?
Carla.
Spell it.
In English, Carla.
Carla! Why did Yaakov see, what did he see in those wagons that revived him? Oh, v'techi ruach. Big deal, it's a bunch of wagons. All right, I did like that too when I saw the pasuk.
That's what they were learning.
What?
They were learning.
They were learning at their...
Okay, it's a good one. It's a good one. I like it. I like it. I like the way you think, Geula. Very good brain you got going there. Carla. You have a Hebrew name? Tzipora and Carla. Okay, I won't ask any questions. Wow. Tzipora, we've got Tzipora. Tzipora, the Chatan Sofer, alav shalom, and the holy Ben Ish Chai, alav shalom, explain that the word agalot can be split into two words. Ain, galut. What does this mean? In gematria, in numerical value, ain is how much? 70, very good. So ain, the 70, is referring to the 70 nations of the world, right? Ain umot. The agalot, these agalot, the ain galut, was a hint to Yaakov that this is the beginning of the exile that we're destined to experience. Galut Mitzrayim, the Egyptian exile, was the exile that ignited the other 4 exiles that the Jews would undergo under the influences of the dominion of the other 70 nations of the world. When Yaakov saw the agalot, he understood what Yosef was telling him. And what he was telling him was, Abba, the time has come for us to go down to Egypt and for the first exile to begin. Now Yaakov was hesitant. How is Am Yisrael going to survive such an exile? How are we going to endure the tumah of Mitzrayim? But when the Shevatim told their father, Et kol divrei Yosef, everything that Yosef spoke to them about, well, pitom boom, he suddenly changes his mind. The Shevatim tell Yaakov, Abba, don't worry. Yosef prepared us for the exile. He asked us to bring all our flocks and our herds so that Paro will have no other choice but to keep us separated and Goshen in our own community. We're not going to assimilate with the Egyptians. And not only that, Yosef moved everybody from one side of the country to the other side of the country so nobody should feel a need to try and fit in, so that we won't experience the peer pressure like everybody else who experiences when they're a new resident in a new country. And you know what else he did, Abba? He passed a law that all clergymen in Egypt won't have to pay taxes now. They won't have to. We won't have the financial burden, and we can continue to learn Torah. And guess what? He did all of that to ensure that we have a chance of making it out of this galut. When they told Yaakov all the things Yosef said, Yaakov said, now I'm ready to go down to Egypt. Now that I know that Yosef prepared the groundwork and planted, listen to these words, the seeds of the Yeshua, the seeds of the redemption. Now that I know my family and the future Am Yisrael has a chance of remaining unassimilated, I'm ready to go down to Egypt. That was the greatness of Yosef. And I'm going to tell you why that's so amazing, Tzipora. Because you and I, and all these women here, are sitting here tonight, faithful Jews to the Torah and to Hashem, because of the great people in every generation that planted roots during their time so that we can have a future in our time. Shamat. Now, at the end of the Galut Mitzrayim, the night, I'm about to reveal to you very deep secrets now. At the end of the Galut Mitzrayim, the night before the Jewish people were scheduled to leave Egypt, Hashem commanded Am Yisrael to take the blood of the sacrificial lamb, of the Korban Pesach, and to place it on the mashkof, on the top of the doorpost, as well as on both sides of the doorpost. Yamin, right, small, left, and the mashkof, which is the top. What was the symbolic act of the blood on the doorpost? Geula, you got an answer for this? If you got an answer for this one, I'm sitting down and you're taking over. Geula.
Wasn't it
What's with the blood on the doorpost? Right, left, on top. What's up with that? Good for you. No, actually good for me.
We're surrounded by mitzvah. We've been doing this.
I like it. That's not what the Mekubalim say. But I like it. Your mind is working. That's good. She's saying because we should be surrounded with mitzvot. I like your head. So let me tell you the secret. And by the way, the reason why I'm revealing it to you is because every time now you're going to walk out the door of your house, you're going to think of the doorpost in a completely different way. And when you walk in through the door, you're also going to think about the doorpost. Maybe we'll even stop for a second. Chachamim tell us that the mashkof, the top of the doorpost, that represents Hashem, who's always above you, watching over you in Shamayim. That's number one. The first side of the doorpost, where the mezuzah is placed, if you're coming into the house, it's where? On your right or left? Where? You're coming into the house, where's the mezuzah? Where? Open the door, let's show everybody. Yafeh. When you walk into the house, the mezuzah is on your right. When you leave the house, the mezuzah is on what side of the doorpost? Your left. The mezuzah, the part of the doorpost that where the mezuzah rests, represents Yosef HaTzadik. The other side, that side where there is no mezuzah, represents Sarah Imenu, Aleh Shalom. How? Why? The doorpost in Egypt represented the door that would open up for the Jewish people to finally leave the Galut. You know what got us out of Egypt? You know what gave us the ability to remain steadfast to Torah and not to assimilate? You know what enabled us Bechal to be Zaycha, to merit to that first Ge'ulah and Yeshua? Boom, it's the doorpost. How so? It's Yosef on one side, Sarah on the other side, and Hashem above. Because of what Yosef did, and all the incredible measures he took on behalf of Am Yisrael, we remained in Goshen and we did not assimilate. We remained in our Jewish community in the merit of Yosef HaTzadik, who turned Egypt literally upside down for the sake of the preservation of Am Yisrael. And notice, why did I tell you, when you leave the house, the mezuzah is on your left, that's Yosef. When you come in, it's on your right. You know why it's like that? What does the left side represent in Kabbalah? Does anybody know? Geula? Din. Din, which is strict judgment. What's the right? Rachamim. Right? Okay. When you walk out of your house, why is the mezuzah on your left? Why is Yosef HaTzadik represented by the left side? Because the problems don't begin in the house. The problem is the minute you walk out of the house. What's waiting for you outside the door? What's waiting for you outside the door? Nisyonot. Secularism. Everything that you're going to be exposed to outside your home. So the mezuzah sits on the left side because that's where din rests. Because you're about to go out into the world now. That's a very dangerous place when you're exposed to something that chas v'shalom could create a decline in your spirituality. So as you're leaving, you've got Yosef and the mezuzah on the left because that's the protection that you're going to need as you step out into that world. When you come into your house, that's okay. It's on the right. That's rachamim because now you're being insulated. Vantem? But now on the other side, we've got Sarah Imenu, who is also an incredible trailblazer. She also planted seeds for the future of the women in Am Yisrael who would undergo the Galut in Mitzrayim. If you remember, Tracy, Sarah was strategically placed by Hashem in the palace of Paro. And if you remember, she was taken by Paro when he thought that she was Abraham's sister. Hashem wanted her in Paro's palace so that she should remain true to her tzniut, so she should remain steadfast in her faith and not engage in any sin with Paro. So Sarah, says the Zohar Kadosh, left her feminine strength and her modesty and resilience there in Egypt. For whom to draw from? From the women who were going to be there later on in history. She planted a seed of fortitude and resistance for the future women of Am Yisrael who would one day find themselves in the Galut of Mitzrayim. That's why you've got Sarah as you walk out on your right. Years later, by the way, Paro decreed that all the Jewish baby boys that are born should be thrown into the Nile River. That's this week's Parshat. But somehow I wanted to keep the girls alive. Why? What? Geula, you changed your mind? Because he wanted them to grow up and have nobody to marry. I mean, if there are no boys and there's just girls, they're going to have no other choice but to marry Egyptian men. But because Sarah walked out of Paro's palace pure and holy, because she had already planted the seeds of modesty for the future daughters of Am Yisrael, the women in Egypt were able to resist the temptations of the Egyptian men. That's the right side of your doorpost. And the top of the doorpost is Keneged Borei Olam, Hashem, who promised Avraham Avinu that although his children are going to be slaves in a foreign land, they will be taken out of bondage with great wealth, right? B'chush gadol, and with great miracles. B'yad rama, b'zroa netuya. You realize what's going on when you're leaving the door? When you leave your doorpost, your house every day? You should kiss the mezuzah with tremendous kavanah. You should turn to the other side, to the right side of Todah, Sarah. And then you got to look above and say, Hashem, please take care of me. I'm going out into the world now. It doesn't matter where you go, even if you go to the supermarket. You have to ask for divine assistance and special protection. Borei Olam, Yosef HaTzadik, Sarah Imenu. Could you get better than that? Ladies in every generation were gifted with tzaddikim, with righteous individuals who have tremendous foresight to be able to do unbelievable acts that set up the future redemption for all of us. We have people in previous generations and who are sitting here in this room tonight, who have made sacrifices and they've taken things upon themselves and have remained very strong in a very difficult galut. You women, you're planting seeds today so that our Torah, so that our children, so that Am Yisrael has a chance at a future Geula. The Gemara of Megillah tells us that before any tzara, before any ailment or decree befell Am Yisrael throughout the generations, God already put in place certain great individuals that would pull us out and through those difficult times. God already plants the seeds of redemption even before the crisis arises. In the story of Hanukkah, Tzipporah, right? Good. Right? I got it right? When the Jews were sinking into spiritual oblivion, Hashem planted the seeds of the Maccabim, of Bet Hashmonai, and the holy Yehudit, who inspired her brothers to wage battle against the Greeks and were victorious. And he did that way before. Elisheva? Boy, I got it right. In the story of Purim, when we were almost exterminated by Haman Harasha, Hashem had already planted the seeds of salvation through Mordechai HaYehudi alav shalom and Esther HaMalka aleh shalom. Devorah, in the story of our slavery in Egypt, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had already rooted the redemption through Moshe Rabbeinu, through Miriam, through Aharon, through Yosef, through Sarah, through Tzipporah, through Yocheved. In every generation, God plants the seeds of salvation because He knows there might be times of trouble, times of tragedy and difficulty for us. That's what the Pasuk in Sefer Yirmiyah Navi, alav shalom, states. Listen to these words. Hoy. What do you think hoy means? Like hoy, like a... Hoy. Ki gadol hayom hahu me'en kamo. Oy, for that day is great, and there is none like it. Ve'et tzara hi leYaakov. And when there is a time of distress for Yaakov, meaning for the nation of Israel, umimena yivashea. Through it, Yaakov will be saved. These words reassure us that Hashem's salvation has been there all along, right there in front of our eyes. God already planted seeds of Yeshua, ki gadol hayom hahu. That day of salvation is great, me'en kamahu. There's no other day like it, because that's the day when all our troubles and all the fears and all the anxieties and the distress and the tzara is going to remain in the galut. As you walk out through your doorpost and into the redemption and to a brand new day. All you have to do is have the emunah and the foresight to be able to see the Yeshua, to see that great day of salvation. All you have to do is envision yourself walking through that doorpost and into a day of personal and global Yeshua. I want to end this shiur with two stories, two amazing stories. You ready? What's your name?
Hannah.
Hannah? What a beautiful name. You know what Hannah stands for? Oh, we got another Geula over here. Very good. Did you ever know that, Hannah? Oh, very good. You see, even Hannah knew that. Rabbi Shlomo Kadosh was once heading upstate New York. I don't know if you've ever been, on the highway over there. It was late at night, it was dark, and he was driving on Route 17. Whoever's driven on Route 17 knows that it feels like you're driving forever. And Rav Shlomo, he's very tired, and eventually his head starts to kind of, that happens sometimes, you dip a little. And he tried not to fall asleep, so he decided to put on a CD of a shiur to keep himself awake. Now, it's amazing that he Bechlal thought a shiur would keep him awake, because when I put any talking on, I fall asleep, but he felt it's going to wake him up. And the shiur be'emet, the lecture, kept him up for about 45 minutes, and then suddenly again his head starts to drop, and it can't handle it, and he fell asleep while the car was speeding at 85 miles an hour. And the car began to veer off the road, heading straight at pretty much a brick wall. And just as he's about to hit the wall, he hears this loud honk like of a truck, beep, like honk, honk, and he opens his eyes, he sees the wall, and at the last second he grabs the wheel, boom, and he steers the car back onto the highway. Shlomo was so startled, he said, oh wow, that honking woke me up and saved my life. Heather, you hear this? He looked in his rearview mirror. He wanted to thank whoever it was that honked. He looks around and he saw nobody's on the road other than him. And he's trying to figure out where did this honking come from? Who was it that honked the horn that saved his life? Because there are no other cars around. And suddenly it hit him. He rewinds the CD to the spot that he was listening to before he thought that he fell asleep. And he hears that while the rabbi on the CD is lecturing away, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the rabbi must have been standing near an open window. There was, I guess, a truck standing near the window where the rabbi was lecturing, where all of a sudden a loud beep, honk, and that's what will come up. So he says, look at that. This CD, this lecture, was recorded 3 years ago. 3 years ago already, God put that rabbi who gave this lecture next to a window where a truck would pass by and honk so loudly. And not only that, but look what happened. That loud honk, they left on the recording. They didn't edit it out. So that 3 years later, as I'm driving down Route 17 on a dark country road in the middle of the night, if I fall asleep behind the wheel listening to this lecture and about to hit a brick wall, the loud honking of the horn should wake me up at the last second and save my life. Hashem, thank you for planting the seed of my salvation before the tragedy even struck. Ve'et tzara hi leYaakov, umimena yivashea. There's a Yeshua waiting for each of us here that's already been planted in Shamayim by Hashem some time ago. And at times the messengers of the salvation are things like this, like what I just told you. And sometimes it's coming from our righteous ancestors of long ago. Our life as individuals in Am Yisrael and as a nation is a huge, huge puzzle filled with thousands of pieces that are beginning to unfold. And just like the original exile of Egypt, the seeds of our Yeshua from this current galut have already been planted. And when the moment comes that Mashiach is going to reveal himself, we're going to see the Geulah, we're going to see the Yeshua, and we're going to say, wow, this was all from Hashem. The one who calculated and put all this together in a brilliant, masterful plan. I now see how the seeds of redemption were right there in front of my eyes all along. Wow, look how everything came together. Ladies, in every situation in life, when we're faced with a difficult challenge, we have to stop for a moment and grab hold of our faith, of our emunah, and of our bitachon, and we have to turn to Hashem, and we have to say, Hashem, you gave me this nisayon, this challenge, and it's very hard. But I have faith that you also planted the seeds of my salvation. So I'm just praying to you, I'm just davening to you. You should have rachamim on me, you should have mercy on me, you should have compassion on my soul, and reveal to me and show me the makings of and the budding of my salvation, because I know it's already there and I'm not giving up. I believe with complete faith that at any moment you're going to reveal the Yeshua to me. Having said that, I'm going to conclude with this last story that took place in a town in Europe called Eisenstadt in the 1100s. The Jews in this town, they had a very interesting custom during the time of Hanukkah. They would all congregate in the local shul, and they would light the menorah, the Chanukiah, in the Aron Kodesh. They'd open up the Aron for everybody to see the menorah and the Sifrei Torah that were there. And it was there in the Aron that they'd light the Hanukkah candles all 8 nights of Hanukkah. And they did that year after year. What a strange and bizarre custom to light a menorah in the Aron Kodesh. What was the secret behind this custom? Where did this custom come from? I'll tell you where it came from. I wasn't going to leave you hanging, though. During that time in the 1100s, the Crusades came through Europe on their great campaign to wage a religious war that was directed by the Latin Church in an attempt to regain Yerushalayim for the Christian world and to force people to accept their religion. Sadly, the Crusaders wreaked havoc from one city to the next, and one of their scapegoats were the Jews of each and every city throughout Europe. The Crusades marched into the Jewish towns. They murdered thousands upon thousands of men, women, and children. And not just Jews. They also murdered anybody that wouldn't convert to Christianity. They looted and they plummeted city after city. And at some point, word spread that they were heading towards the town of Eisenstadt. And of course, the Jews over there were very afraid. They didn't know what to do. They knew if the Crusades, if they reach their town, there's going to be a terrible pogrom, and the entire town is pretty much going to be wiped out. So the rabbi announced that everyone should gather in the shul on that night. Every Jew in the town, men, women, and children, came into the synagogue. That night was the first night of Hanukkah. They bolted shut all the windows in the shul. They locked themselves in the shul, barricading themselves in. And the Rav tried to offer some words of comfort and inspiration. But suddenly, they heard the thundering noise of horses approaching and charging into their town. They heard the soldiers yelling. They smelled smoke. And they realized that all the horrible rumors were indeed true. The Crusaders were wreaking havoc in the entire town, searching for Jews, running into their homes, looting and stealing. And it was at that moment that the rabbi turned to the congregation and he said, look, we don't have a lot of time. Quickly, now that we're here together, let's take upon ourselves to accept with love that we're going to have to give ourselves up and die al Kiddush Hashem, in sanctification of God's name. And as the last thing we do together, let us as a community light the menorah that symbolizes the sacrifice of the Jewish people throughout the generations who held on to their purity in spite of the secular worldview and their desire to assimilate us. The rabbi turned to the shamash and he said to him, open up the Aron Kodesh. In this Aron, there is an old menorah that was here since the time that the previous generations built this synagogue over 100 years ago. Bring out that old menorah so we could light it before they destroy the congregation and all the people in it. Let's all do this mitzvah together. The shamash opens up the aron, and there was the old menorah of Eisenstadt sitting there in the back. The shamash leaned all the way over to grab the menorah and pulled it towards him, but didn't move. He yanks the menorah again. It's not budging. It seemed as if the menorah it felt like it was nailed to the platform of the aron. And this time he says, I don't know what's going on here. He yanked the menorah with such strength that the menorah went to the side, and all of a sudden, the entire aron started to slide to the right to reveal a trap door that was right there behind the aron in front of their eyes. They open up the trap door and they see a winding stairwell that leads to an underground basement. The rabbi and the shamash, they look at each other, they look at the menorah in shock, and they realized that the Jews who built that shul all those years ago knew that such a day would come. After all, they were in a very difficult galut. So like Yosef HaTzadik, they planted a seed and prepared themselves for the day that they might be attacked. They built that shul in such a way where this old menorah inside the Aron Kodesh would be like a lever that would release the trap door that leads to a safe place underground. The rabbi couldn't believe it. He turns to everybody and he motions, shh, everybody, go down, everybody, go into the bunker beneath the shul. Everybody starts to stream down. Once everybody was underneath, the rabbi and the shamash started to close the trap door, and they moved slid the aron back to its place. Zeu. Minutes later, they heard the crusaders breaking down the doors of the shul. And they heard how they were ransacking the entire shul, yelling, and they're wondering, where are all the Jews of this town? Where did they disappear to? The Jews of Eisenstadt remained underground in silence for 3 days until there was complete quiet outside the shul. After those 3 days, they came out and they saw that the shul had been ravaged. The entire town was turned upside down. But the Crusades had moved on, and the Jews of Eisenstadt were safe and had miraculously survived. To remember this great miracle, to commemorate the reality that God always prepares the salvation before the tragedy, and how the Yeshua was sitting and waiting for them when they needed it most. When they realized that the Yeshua was right in front of their eyes, embedded in the Aron Kodesh, behind the miracle of the menorah. From that day on, they decided to light the menorah in the Aron Kodesh as a reminder to everybody in that town that Et tzara hi leYaakov. What can we do? We go through difficult challenges and we go through nisyonot. But we have to know that God gives us that challenge in order to strengthen us. These are growth spurts that we're supposed to get through. And we have to know that umimena yivashea, from the nisayon itself, from the challenge itself, the salvation, the Yeshua can manifest. Because in the tzara itself, there is a great salvation that's waiting to be revealed, that's been planted much before. Hashem has never forsaken us. He will redeem us from this galut as He redeemed our ancestors from Egypt. And when that day comes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to show us how in every generation He placed great tzaddikim who, like Yosef, are creating a legacy of salvation. And in this final generation as well, God has already prepared the Yeshua for us to partake in. It's in that moment that we're going to see the divine plan, and with it we'll also be zeicha to see Mashiach Tzidkenu. Amen. Ken Yehi Ratzon.